If you have even a slight interest in American history, you'll probably know that the state of Texas used to be a country. But there were several other states that used to be countries in their own right as well. In fact, today might be the first time you've ever heard that your state used to be independent. Some of these states had international recognition, while others did not. Some of these states were independent for merely a few weeks, while one remained independent for over a century. For our first state, we're going to go back before the Declaration of Independence. On the 4th of May, Rhode Island declared independence from Britain a whole 2 months before the rest of the country on July 4th, 1776. We'll come back to Rhode Island soon. On January 15th, 1777, the Republic of New Connecticut was founded, which would be renamed the Vermont Republic later that year. Vermonters fought on the American side during the War of Independence, despite not being part of the United States. The Vermont flag had 14 stars, which represented its inhabitants' desires to join the other 13 states. That said, several politicians in the Vermont Republic entered into secret negotiations with Britain in order to have Vermont rejoin the British Empire. However, these negotiations ended after the American victory at the Battle of Yorktown in 1781, which made it obvious that America would win the war. After the Revolution, Vermont wished to join the United States, but the land the Republic occupied was claimed by New York, which prevented Vermont statehood for several years. On September 13th, 1788, the United States Constitution officially replaced the Articles of Confederation as America's governing document. The framers of the Constitution stipulated that the document would be binding if 9 out of the original 13 states ratified it. And by that point, it had been ratified by 11 states and rejected by 2, Rhode Island and North Carolina. They had still not ratified the Constitution by the time George Washington was inaugurated as America's first president on April 30th, 1789. Thus, President Washington legally had no power over them. Their rejection of the Constitution was based on their concern that it would expand federal power and did not include a Bill of Rights. However, Congress would approve a Bill of Rights in September, leading North Carolina to ratify the Constitution and join the United States on November 21st, 1789. However, Rhode Island continued to hold out. Opposition to the Constitution ran deep in Rhode Island. It was the only state that did not send any delegates to the Constitutional Convention. It was also the only state where ratification of the Constitution was put up for a popular vote. And then over 90% of voters opposed the Constitution. Eventually, U.S. Congress applied economic pressure on Rhode Island in order to get it to fold. There were concerns that Massachusetts and Connecticut would split Rhode Island amongst themselves. Thus, Rhode Island finally gave in on May 29, 1790, as delegates voted to ratify the Constitution, but just barely. The vote that ended Rhode Island's independence was 34 to 32. Vermont's 14 years of independence were also coming to a close. New York agreed to relinquish its claims on Vermont, and the Republic became a state, on March 4th, 1791. 4 years later, Kamehameha I established the Kingdom of Hawaii, though it would be decades before America would have any interest in the region. Hawaii is unique in that it is the only formerly independent state that was a monarchy. We'll get back to Hawaii later. In 1810, the Republic of West Florida was established, but this one doesn't really count because the area became part of Louisiana, not Florida. Don't worry though, Florida man does get his own country later. Now we get to the famous one. Everything's bigger in Texas, and Texas is by far the largest of the formerly independent states, especially since parts of Oklahoma, Kansas, New Mexico, Colorado, and Wyoming were included in its borders at the time. From 1835 to 1836, Texas fought a war against Mexico. The rebels, who were mostly but not entirely American settlers, declared independence on March 2nd, 1836. The Texans fought Mexico at the famous Battle of the Alamo, which they lost, but they still won the war anyway. Many, though not all, Texans wanted to join the United States. Texas's first president, Sam Houston, was among those who supported American annexation. However, public opinion in America was divided. Many Americans were concerned about Texan statehood leading to war with Mexico, and some were opposed to adding another slave state to the Union. Annexation of Texas was the main issue of contention in the 1844 presidential election. Pro-annexation James K. Polk defeated anti-annexation Henry Clay, and Texas would be admitted as a state on December 29, 1845, after nearly a decade of independence. At the same time, America and Britain both claimed the Oregon Territory. American settlers formed their own government in 1841, and thus Oregon could be considered an independent country starting in 1841. Just like with Texas, annexation by the United States was the settlers' goal. And just like with Texas, Oregon used to be a lot bigger, and it included the entirety of the modern states of Washington and Idaho, along with parts of Montana and Wyoming. It was annexed by the United States in 1846. Also in 1846, at the beginning of the Mexican-American War, some American settlers in what is now California were encouraged to revolt by American General John Fremont. They founded the California Republic on June 14, 1846. It lasted for 25 days before the U.S. military brought the region under American control. The country had its name California Republic on the flag, which is still on the California state flag today. The Confederate States of America was established in February 1861. 7 states had already seceded before the Confederacy was formed. South Carolina was the first, followed by Mississippi, then Florida, then Alabama, then Georgia, then Louisiana, and finally, Texas. These states were briefly independent before joining the Confederacy. In 1869, the United States Supreme Court ruled in Texas versus White that it's illegal for a state to secede from the Union. All this time, the Kingdom of Hawaii maintained its independence. though the country was increasingly economically dominated by the U.S. On January 17, 1893, Queen Liliuokalani was overthrown in a coup, ending the monarchy. Hawaii became a republic, with Sanford Dole serving as president. And yes, he was from the Dole family of pineapple magnates that you might be thinking of. The purpose of the creation of the Republic of Hawaii was so it could be annexed by the United States. However, U.S. President Grover Cleveland was anti-imperialist and opposed annexation. The next president, William McKinley, saw things differently, and Hawaii was annexed in 1898, though it would not be admitted as a state for another 61 years. Most of the states I discussed were not normal countries, and some of them didn't even have flags. They were typically short-lived and had no international recognition. Hawaii was the most legitimate of these states, as it existed for over a century and was recognized by several other countries. Texas had diplomatic relations with other countries too, and was a legitimate country in its own right as well. You've also got to admire Rhode Island, which was independent for 2 months before the Declaration of Independence, and then for a year and a half after the Constitution was ratified. The tiny state held out as long as possible, and then only reluctantly gave up its independence. So what do you think? Which of these formerly independent states is your favorite? Do you live in one of these states? Do you think that your state might secede in the future? Let me know in the comments.